Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into the renewed violence in the Indian state of Manipur. Now, this is a deeply complex situation, and our goal here is to really unpack the roots of a conflict that just continues to burn.
Despite some recent political changes, Manipur remains incredibly volatile. The whole state is just fundamentally divided, it's heavily militarized, and the level of mistrust between communities, well, it's through the roof.
And the human cost here is just staggering. To put a number on it, official figures say more than 260 people have been killed since this particular wave of violence erupted back in 2023.
So, what's happening on the ground right now? Well, recently we saw something pretty unprecedented. Simultaneous shutdowns in both the valley and the hill regions. I mean, can you imagine? This move just completely paralyzed daily life. Transport, business, the entire economy just ground to a halt. So what sparked this latest paralysis? Well, it really boils down to two key acts of violence back in April that took an already tense situation and just pushed it right over the edge. Let's look at what happened. On April 7th, a bomb hits a civilian home in the Bishnupur district. That's in the valley. Then, a little later, a totally separate armed ambush targets a convoy up in the Ukhrul district, a hill region. See the pattern? One incident in the valley, one in the hills, affecting both major communities. And the details of that Bishnupur attack, they're just gut-wrenching. The victims were a 5-year-old child and a 6-month-old baby. When you have civilians being targeted, especially children, well, that triggered this massive emotional wave of outrage and immediate protests. And this is where you see this horrible, predictable cycle kick in. A violent incident happens. Then, of course, mass protests erupt. Security forces get sent in to respond, which often leads to more clashes, more casualties. The conflict just keeps spiraling, digging itself deeper and deeper with every single turn. So, all of this leads to the most important question. Beyond the immediate triggers, the bombings and the ambushes, what is this conflict in Manipur really about? To really get a handle on Manipur, you have to start with its geography, because the map here isn't just about mountains and plains. It's the core ethnic and political fault line. The conflict is fundamentally defined by this division between the Central Valley and the hills that surround it. Let's break this down. The valley is home mostly to the Meitei community. They're largely Hindu and are not classified as a scheduled tribe. Then you have the hills, which are predominantly home to the Koki and Naga communities, who are recognized as scheduled tribes and are mostly Christian. And these aren't just stats on a page. These are the very lines along which this conflict is being fought. And the situation has gotten so bad that many are now calling it a de facto ethnic partition. What that means is the valley is effectively Meitei-controlled, while the hills are Kuki-controlled. Normal, everyday interaction between the two communities, it's almost completely gone. Okay, so now let's dig into the issues that have been simmering for years, the unresolved root causes that are truly driving all of this. It really comes down to 5 main things. You've got disputes over land and territory, you've got the fight over identity and this demand for scheduled tribe status, then there are deep economic disparities, the increasing militarization of society, and layered on top of all of that, a profound crisis in governance. So let's talk about land, because this is a huge piece of the puzzle. Under the current laws, the Meiteis who live in the very densely populated valley are legally barred from buying land in the much larger hill areas. That land is reserved exclusively for the tribal Kuki and Naga communities. And this land issue feeds directly into what is probably the single most explosive political debate here, the Meitei demand to be granted scheduled tribe, or ST status. They argue they need this for equal rights, but the Kuki and Naga communities are vehemently opposing this. They fear it would allow Meiteis to buy their land and would completely dilute the benefits they get from their protected status. So what you end up with is this toxic, zero-sum political game. Both communities feel like their culture, their identity, their very future is under an existential threat. A perceived political gain for one side is seen as a direct and devastating loss for the other. And then, on top of all that, you throw in economic disparity. The valley region is just significantly more developed, better infrastructure, better services. For the people living in the less developed hill regions, this just fuels a powerful sense of neglect and resentment. So you take all these factors, the land, the identity politics, the economic gap, and you mix them together, it's really no wonder that Manipur's future is perpetually on edge, making any path to a lasting peace incredibly difficult to find.
Now, you might think, well, what about a new government? It's true, a new government was formed back in February 2026 after a period of direct rule from the central government called President's Rule. But, as the recent violence makes crystal clear, just changing the political leadership hasn't been nearly enough to address these deep-seated ethnic and structural problems.
And beyond the tragic death toll, there's another staggering number we have to talk about. Over 60,000 people have been displaced. They've been forced to flee their homes, flee their villages, and lose absolutely everything in the process.
And that brings us to a final, very difficult question. The state is fractured, not just by geography, but by fear and by trauma. The social fabric has been completely torn apart. Rebuilding requires so much more than a ceasefire. It means tackling the core issues of land, identity, and economic justice that we've outlined. So, with communities this segregated and trusts this broken, what could a path to peace for Manipur even look like?